It was October 16, 1990, a cold, rainy evening in the small town of Fairmont, where nothing ever seemed to happen. 16-year-old Emily Carter, a quiet, studious girl, had stayed late after school to finish a history project in the library. Her best friend, Rachel, offered to wait for her, but Emily politely declined, insisting she'd only be a few more minutes. She was last seen around 6:40 p.m. by the school janitor, walking alone down the hallway toward the rear exit. What happened after that remains one of the town's darkest mysteries. Emily wasn't the kind of teenager who stayed out late or went off without telling anyone. Her parents, Thomas and Lisa Carter, began to worry just after 8 p.m. when she hadn't returned home. By 9 p.m., her father was already calling friends, neighbors, and the school. No one had seen her. The police were contacted shortly after midnight, and a missing person report was filed. Her bicycle was still chained up at the school's bike rack and drenched in rain. That single, haunting detail was enough to send a chill through everyone involved. The next day, a massive search began. Volunteers combed the surrounding woods, drain pipes were searched, dogs were brought in, helicopters circled overhead. Authorities questioned teachers, classmates, even local store owners, but no one had any useful information. The school's outdated security system didn't have cameras, and the only clue was a vague statement from a classmate who claimed to have seen a man in a dark coat near the parking lot. But the sighting was too vague, and no one else had seen anything. It was as if Emily had vanished into thin air. Rumors began to spread quickly. Some students believed she had run away. Others whispered about a possible stalker who had been seen near the school weeks earlier. Her diary, however, revealed no indication of plans to leave or anyone bothering her. The entries were typical: teenage musings, homework complaints, excitement about an upcoming dance, and small notes about a new teacher, Mr. Grayson, who had recently joined the school's staff. But nothing in her writings hinted at fear or danger. The mystery only deepened, leaving police with no motive, no suspect, and no trace of Emily beyond that rainy Tuesday evening. Within weeks, the media latched onto the story. News vans lined the streets, and reporters followed the family everywhere. Emily's photo appeared on milk cartons, flyers, and national news bulletins. Her parents, exhausted and broken, held tearful press conferences begging for answers, but none came. As weeks turned into months, and months into years, hope began to fade. The town moved on. Slowly, quietly, but the Carter family never did. Something was missing, and deep down, Thomas Carter knew this wasn't just a disappearance. Something darker had happened in the days following Emily's disappearance. Her father, Thomas Carter, became a man transformed. Once a soft-spoken high school science teacher, he quickly shifted into something else entirely: a man on a mission, driven by desperation. While police resources slowly dwindled and public interest shifted to the next headline, Thomas refused to give up. He built a wall of maps, timelines, and photographs in his basement. Pins and red string connected points of interest, like something out of a detective novel. It wasn't an obsession, it was survival. It was the only way he could still breathe. Every morning before work, Thomas would wake up at 4:30 a.m. and go through the same routine: check news articles, reread the case files, and write letters to state and federal agencies begging them to reopen the case. Every night, he returned to that basement, staring at patterns only he could see, hoping to catch something, anything that everyone else missed. Lisa, Emily's mother, tried to support him, but the emotional weight eventually drove her into depression. Their marriage grew silent. Thomas barely noticed. In his mind, time had frozen in 1990. The world could move on, but he couldn't. He began attending missing persons support groups in nearby towns, searching for connections, comparing notes with other grieving parents. In one case, he drove 3 hours to meet a woman whose daughter had also disappeared after school, but the circumstances didn't line up. Still, he took notes, copied patterns, and archived every strange disappearance that even vaguely resembled Emily's. Thomas had binders full of newspaper clippings, phone logs, and classified ad responses. Most nights, he fell asleep in his chair, surrounded by faded photos and dead-end leads, haunted by the same question: what happened to my daughter? Holidays became unbearable. On Christmas mornings, Thomas would place a single wrapped gift in Emily's empty bedroom. He never missed her birthday. Every year, without fail, he placed a candle in the window at exactly the time she was last seen, 6:40 p.m., and stood by it in silence. The room remained untouched. Her posters, her books, her perfume bottle on the dresser all frozen in time. To outsiders, it might have seemed like madness. But to Thomas, it was the only thread left connecting him to his daughter. The only evidence that she had once existed in that house. Even after decades, he kept revisiting every place she ever went: the library, the school steps, the back alley where the janitor last saw her. He tried to remember every conversation they'd had that final week. Did she say anything strange? Did she seem distracted? Was there someone in the background? He hadn't noticed. His memories became interrogations. He no longer trusted his own mind, yet he refused to stop. Something inside him kept whispering that the truth hadn't disappeared. It was just buried somewhere, waiting for him to find it. It was a rainy afternoon in September 2012, when Thomas Carter found himself in the attic, digging through dusty old boxes he hadn't touched in years. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to distract himself from the weight of another sleepless night. The seasons were changing again, and for Thomas, autumn always brought back the ghost of 1990. As he moved aside a pile of books and broken picture frames, his eyes landed on something familiar. A stack of Emily's school memorabilia, neatly tied together with string. At the top was her 1990 Fairmont High School yearbook, its maroon cover slightly warped with age. He had seen this yearbook countless times before. It had been part of the police investigation, examined, photographed, and returned. He had flipped through it over the years as a way to feel closer to Emily, seeing her smiling face, her handwritten message to a friend in the margins, and the group photo from the debate club she loved so much. But on this particular afternoon, something felt different. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the book again, flipping toward the back pages filled with student quotes, predictions, and handwritten messages scribbled during those final days of school. That's when he noticed it. Under Emily's senior portrait, where most students had written things like "going to college" or "can't wait to get out of this town," someone had scrawled in faint pencil, "I won't be here much longer. I think he knows." The writing was small, almost hidden beneath the printed text. Thomas froze. He had never seen that before. He held the page up to the light, tracing the pencil marks with his fingers. It wasn't in Emily's handwriting, of that he was sure, but whoever wrote it had done so carefully, deliberately, and, most disturbingly, anonymously. His heart raced as he flipped through the rest of the book, now scanning every page with fresh, panicked eyes. A few pages later, near the student council photos, he spotted another note, barely visible unless you tilted the page just right. "Don't trust him, he's not who he says he is." Again, faint pencil. Again, unsigned. Thomas felt like the air had been knocked out of him. How had no one noticed these? Had someone noticed and ignored them? He grabbed a magnifying glass and flashlight and began going page by page, treating the yearbook like a crime scene. Then came a third note, buried near the faculty section, next to the portrait of a new staff member who had joined that year. A name Thomas vaguely remembered, Mr. Grayson. Under his photo, another anonymous scribble. "Why does he have no past?" That was the moment Thomas's instincts roared back to life. Something had been hiding in plain sight all these years. The yearbook wasn't just a memory book anymore. It had become a map of warnings. And Thomas had just discovered the first breadcrumb. After discovering the chilling handwritten notes in the yearbook, Thomas Carter found himself swept into a mental storm he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in over 2 decades, he had something new: not hope, but direction. He scanned every inch of that yearbook, documenting the locations of the scribbled messages and writing down their exact wording. His mind was racing, retracing the past with fresh eyes. Why hadn't anyone seen these before? Were they left as warnings? If so, who had written them and who were they about? The most unsettling part was the name that kept surfacing with a heavy shadow. Mr. Grayson. Thomas could barely remember the man. Grayson had joined the faculty as a temporary substitute for an English teacher who'd gone on extended medical leave. He was soft-spoken, intelligent, and seemingly well-liked among students. But something about that third note, "Why does he have no past?" dug into Thomas like a splinter. Driven by a new surge of urgency, he went to the local school board archives to retrieve faculty records from 1990. What he found only deepened the mystery. There were no official employment documents for a Mr. Grayson, no resume, no application, not even a school ID photo in the administration's database. Just his portrait in the yearbook, and then nothing. The deeper Thomas dug, the stranger things became. Some teachers vaguely remembered Grayson, how he dressed formally every day, how he kept mostly to himself. But their recollections were foggy, fragmented, as if the man had existed just long enough to be forgotten. A retired guidance counselor recalled something odd. Grayson had resigned abruptly, just 3 weeks after Emily's disappearance, citing family matters and moving out of town without even collecting his last paycheck. That detail sent a wave of ice through Thomas's chest. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone leaves town days after his daughter vanishes and no one had thought to question it. Then came the old storage boxes. With the help of a sympathetic school custodian, Thomas gained access to the basement archive of unused school materials. There, in a decaying cardboard box labeled Old Staff Materials, he found something that made his breath catch. A notebook labeled Room 212, Grayson. Inside were a few pages of lesson plans, and oddly personal scribbles, some about classic literature, others more fragmented. They never notice what's right in front of them. She asked too many questions. Must be careful. The handwriting didn't match the yearbook notes, but the tone was unmistakably eerie. Like someone writing with something to hide. As Thomas flipped through the final pages of the notebook, one name kept recurring in the margins. Emily. Sometimes underlined, sometimes surrounded by arrows. In one section, an entire paragraph was written in capital letters, then violently scratched out. Thomas could barely make out the words beneath the blacked-out ink, but one sentence still showed through. She doesn't trust me anymore. By now, the clues were stacking high and every single one pointed to a man no one really knew. A man who had vanished from Fairmont just like his daughter had. But where had Grayson gone? And who was he, really? With each passing day, Thomas Carter became more convinced that Mr. Grayson was never who he claimed to be. After finding the cryptic lesson book and bizarre notes with Emily's name scribbled inside, Thomas turned his focus entirely toward unraveling the man's identity. But it was like chasing a ghost. Grayson had left no forwarding address, no personal records, and no legal employment documentation. His name never appeared on payroll sheets, tax filings, or even local housing records. He had come to Fairmont out of nowhere and vanished just as mysteriously. It was now obvious to Thomas, whoever this man was, he had inserted himself into the school under false pretenses. Determined to get answers, Thomas contacted an old friend who worked in state education archives. After weeks of digging, the results came back with a chilling truth. There was no licensed teacher named Richard Grayson, not in Fairmont, not in the state, and not in any neighboring counties. No teaching certificate, no degrees, not even a driver's license registered under that name. It was a fabricated identity. The man had slipped through the cracks, leaving behind only a name and a face printed in one yearbook. It was at that moment Thomas realized that the school and everyone in it had been infiltrated by a complete stranger. Fueled by this horrifying realization, Thomas began reaching out to former students from that year. Some remembered Grayson as interesting or oddly charming. Others described him as distant and intense. One girl recalled how he would linger after class, asking strange personal questions. Another admitted that she never felt comfortable around him but had dismissed it as teenage anxiety. Then came a name Thomas hadn't heard in years, Rachel Myers, Emily's best friend. When Thomas reached out to her, she hesitated at first but eventually opened up about something she had never told the police. Emily had become afraid of someone shortly before she disappeared. Rachel recalled Emily confiding in her that she felt watched and that someone at school had asked her to stay after class multiple times for help with advanced reading. Emily wouldn't say who, only that she didn't trust him. But now, with the yearbook messages, the secret notes, and the mysterious disappearance of Grayson, everything clicked into place. Emily had been leaving a trail, subtle, desperate, and the man she feared might have been hiding right there in front of everyone, pretending to be someone he wasn't. Blending in under the pretense of a teacher. Thomas brought all the information to a retired private investigator, who immediately flagged the entire situation as highly suspicious. Together, they began constructing a full profile of the man known as Mr. Grayson, an alias that now appeared to have no origin, no record, and no trace beyond a single year at Fairmont High. It was becoming increasingly clear. This man didn't just fake his identity, he had orchestrated something planned. The horrifying thought that kept Thomas awake at night wasn't just that this man had something to do with Emily's disappearance. It was that he may have done it before and possibly again. It took nearly a year of relentless investigation, digging, and cross-referencing aliases, sightings, and property records before Thomas and the private investigator finally found a cabin tucked deep in the rural outskirts of Elmsbrook, 2 states away. Had been purchased in 1991, just months after Emily's disappearance under a pseudonym. Connected to the same handwriting found in Grayson's school notebook, it was listed under the name G.R. Hayes. The property had no electricity, no running water, and didn't appear on most maps. But satellite images revealed a structure still standing isolated, decaying, hidden behind a dense thicket of trees. It was the first solid lead in 22 years. Thomas turned the information over to authorities, and with enough circumstantial evidence, a search warrant was granted. Local law enforcement, along with forensics specialists, arrived at the cabin one early morning. What they found was far more than they expected. The interior was dusty and silent, filled with old rotting furniture and books stacked floor to ceiling. But it wasn't the main floor that shocked them, it was what they discovered. Beneath it, in a locked rusted trapdoor hidden beneath a moth-eaten rug, they found a narrow staircase leading into a basement that no record of the property had ever shown. The air was thick with mildew and decay. At first glance, it looked like a simple storage space, but within minutes, investigators realized they had entered something far more sinister. The walls were lined with old clothing, shoes, and backpacks. Neatly organized and labeled with years written on masking tape, 1986, 1988, 1990, and so on. In the far corner sat a box filled with what appeared to be personal items, broken watches, necklaces, stuffed animals, hairbrushes, and school ID cards. One of the detectives opened a small wooden drawer and froze. Inside was a delicate silver locket containing a photo of Thomas and Emily, the exact one Emily had worn every day before she vanished. Thomas, who had been forced to wait outside the property perimeter during the search, collapsed to his knees when an officer handed him the locket in an evidence bag. There was no doubt Emily had been in that cabin. Her belongings were among others, suggesting a terrifying pattern. Each item was catalogued and analyzed. Among them were traces of DNA belonging to at least 3 other missing girls, whose cases had long gone cold and were presumed unrelated. Authorities realized they weren't dealing with a one-time event. Whoever had lived in that cabin hadn't just abducted Emily, they had likely hunted multiple victims, always leaving behind just enough to remain invisible. And yet, the most disturbing part of the entire scene wasn't the objects themselves but what was missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no bodies, just belongings, perfectly preserved trophies kept out of view for over 2 decades. There were notebooks, 200s of pages filled with obsessive notes, lists, and coded entries, names, dates, comments on behavior. It was as if the person responsible had been studying them, watching them like subjects in an experiment. But there was one name that appeared more than any other. Always written in capital letters, Emily. Again and again, pages and pages of it. The questions now weren't just about what had happened there, but how deep this nightmare went, and who else might still be missing. In the weeks following the discovery of the cabin and its horrifying contents, the case exploded into national headlines. News outlets labeled it a serial predator's archive, while the FBI quietly joined the investigation, suspecting links to other missing persons cases from neighboring states. But for Thomas Carter, the nightmare had only sharpened. The personal items confirmed Emily had been there, but without a body, there was still no closure, no proof of what had truly happened. Investigators conducted a full search of the surrounding woods with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. Days into the search, in a remote, overgrown area behind the cabin, they found something buried beneath a collapsed tree. What they uncovered were human remains, wrapped in an old quilt and sealed in a plastic lining. Forensics teams worked for days, carefully unearthing every fragment. It wasn't just one person, there were signs of multiple burial sites spread across the property. DNA testing would take weeks, but Thomas already knew. When the forensic examiner eventually confirmed it was Emily, based on dental records and a strand of her hair preserved in her baby book back home, Thomas didn't cry. He just sat in silence, staring at the wall for hours. His daughter had been found, just not in the way he had spent 22 years hoping for, but just as authorities prepared to close the case. One final mystery surfaced. Mr. Grayson's identity still remained a blank void. Fingerprints pulled from the cabin returned, no matches. There were no photos, no official IDs, no birth certificates. The face from the 1990 yearbook, his only known image, yielded nothing in facial recognition databases. They were chasing a ghost, a man who had successfully erased himself from history. Even more disturbingly, the coded notebooks recovered from the basement revealed a chilling timeline, entries dating back to 1984, listing names of girls and behavioral notes, all ending abruptly in 1992. And then nothing. As if he had simply vanished after Fairmont. Digging deeper, investigators found small, unsettling clues hidden within the notebooks, phrases like restart, complete, location compromised, and transition to new cover. Experts believed these were references to relocation, possibly a new identity, and possibly another life somewhere else entirely. If that were true, it meant the man, known as Grayson, had not only killed, but had done so in multiple towns, under different names, possibly even continuing his crimes after Emily. The cabin, while horrifying, might have only been one chapter of a much larger pattern, one no one had yet fully uncovered. But where he had gone after 1992 remained a blank space on every map. The final, most disturbing detail emerged from the yearbook itself. When investigators reviewed copies from other schools in nearby districts from the late 80s, they found something chilling. A man with a similar face and posture appeared in 2 other staff photos under different names, wearing slightly different hairstyles and glasses. Each time, the year after his appearance, a girl had gone missing. Each time, he vanished from records completely. It became clear that Fairmont hadn't been his first stop, it had merely been one of many. Now the question burned deeper than ever. How many yearbooks might still be hiding his face? And how many fathers, like Thomas, were still searching for their daughters, never knowing the real story? To the world, it seemed the case of Emily Carter had finally reached its tragic conclusion. The remains were buried. The news cycle faded. And Fairmont slowly returned to its quiet, forgettable normal. But for Thomas Carter, closure never truly came. His daughter's face still lived in his dreams, and so did the face of the man who took her, whose name he still didn't know. He now keeps that yearbook on his desk. Its pages covered in plastic, the faint pencil markings forever preserved. Sometimes, he flips through it late at night, tracing the letters that started it all. I won't be here much longer. I think he knows. They weren't just a warning. They were a whisper from a terrified girl. A daughter begging to be heard. Authorities believe Grayson, if that was ever his real name, changed identities again, and may still be out there, somewhere, watching, blending in, teaching, perhaps, or just waiting for another quiet town to forget its past. And if that's true, then, maybe, just maybe, another yearbook holds the next clue.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.